Canada has sold itself as a multicultural success story for decades. Different cultures, shared values, everyone thriving. But lately, many Canadians feel that something has gone wrong, and traces of anti immigration sentiment are starting to appear, blaming Canada's multiculturalism. And the elephant in the room today is multiculturalism. And if multiculturalism has failed in Canada, stay with me, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Daybreak, the podcast, and we are talking about Canadian multiculturalism. To understand why people are feeling angry, frustrated, or disillusioned, we have to start with the basic and break it down. Cost of living is a good point to start with. Housing prices have gone up by 35 to 40% in the last decade. Rents have increased by almost 42 to 52% in the same period, and groceries are up by an average of 38 to 45% in major urban areas. Demand for infrastructure and facilities has increased, but supply did not keep up with the population growth. Immigration numbers went up fast, much faster than homes, hospitals, or transit could be built. For many Canadians, diversity now means competing for what was theirs, competing for jobs, competing for housing, and competing for healthcare. And if you ask the new immigrant, he's not a happy camper either. Canada brings in highly skilled immigrants, engineers, nurses, doctors, scientists, economists, and then fails to recognize their credentials. People end up underemployed and underpaid and frustrated and disillusioned. That is bad for newcomers, and that is bad for the country. When engineers drive Ubers, doctors drive cabs, and bankers work retail, everyone loses. Immigrants lose income and dignity, employers lose talent, and the economy loses growth. Faster integration is not charity, and it is not optional. It is economic common sense. Multiculturalism means cultural preservation, not assimilation. And that sounds great on paper and in political rhetoric until it leads to communities living side by side but not together. They live in subdivisions and not in neighborhoods. That's accommodation gone wrong. And as Slavoj Žižek asked the question in German migrant context, how much accommodation is reasonable accommodation? Our policy is completely silent on that. We get too overwhelmed by political correctness and do not want to break hearts, even if it breaks our social structure and starts attacking civil liberties, sometimes in the name of religious freedom. Instead of enforcing shared rules, we circumnavigate around the differences, and that creates resentment and confusion. And here is the core tension. Canada's model says, keep your culture. The state will adapt. But when government brings over 3 million of temporary residents into Canada in 4 short years, these international students, temporary foreign workers, and other work permit holders enter Canada with an expiry date on their visas. They have absolutely no interest in Canadian culture. They are not immigrants, and they're not here to stay. To expect these groups to integrate into Canadian life or to embrace Canadian values is not a fair expectation. Let us be honest for once. Temporary migrants do not come to Canada for its values. They come to Canada for its money. This is not a cultural issue. It's a policy issue. And when economy tightens, wages become stagnant and services strain, resentment does not hit policy. It hits people. And that's the real failure. And now resentment grows, not because diversity failed, but because fairness disappeared. And that's in the core contradiction. When Canada says, you do not need to integrate, keep your culture, but also says, you might not belong here permanently. This is not multiculturalism, this is institutional limbo. Why temporary migrants do not integrate is because they're only responding to the incentives. Why invest in civic life, local politics, social trust, or national identity when your status is temporary and you do not belong? So, what happens instead? They cluster by language and origin. They rely on informal networks. They avoid public visibility and they treat Canada as transactional. That's not cultural failure, it's a policy design failure. Multiculturalism did not fail with permanent immigrants. It failed with temporary migrants because Canada invited them to stay long enough to matter, but not long enough to belong. Close to 2.1 million temporary visas expired during 2025, and 1.9 million will expire this year. Canada increased immigration faster than capacity, and that resulted in supersaturated urban centers like Brampton and Mississauga. Overused and sometimes abused infrastructure that was originally meant for Canadians and permanent residents. Population went up, but housing did not. We are currently short 3.5 million housing units. Healthcare did not scale up either. Canadian healthcare lacks in staffing, in access, and in capacity. And together, they form a system level crisis. Today, Canada is short over 50,000 nurses, almost 30,000 family doctors, tens of thousands of personal support workers, lab technicians, and specialists. Average 2025 ER wait times were between 6 and 12 plus hours. Specialist referrals took almost 6 months on average. Elective surgeries wait time was between 6 and 18 months. Nearly 6.5 million Canadians do not have a regular family doctor. So when opportunities shrink, people stop seeing diversity as enrichment and start seeing it as competition. That is not cultural failure. That is governance failure. Canada's challenge is not immigration or diversity. Our challenge is who we bring in and how fast. Aligning immigration levels with housing and infrastructure is essential, not to stop immigration, but to make it sustainable, fair, and politically durable. Diversity needs a strong common framework, clear laws, clear expectations, and clear consequences. Canada needs to invest in faster economic integration. If immigration is how people enter Canada, economic integration is how they actually become a part of the Canadian dream. Political outsourcing, that's another major issue that encourages formation of social blocs, as government often relies on community leaders, treating ethnic blocs as voting banks. That is not inclusion, that is managed segregation. And it is especially dangerous when these blocs are created on the basis of religions. And just when politics enter the temples, the religion enters the parliament, defeating the secular Canada and crushing its social and cultural construct with rigid faiths and beliefs that are exclusionary and do not belong in our public sphere. Secularism is not about banning religion. It is about putting religion where it belongs, in the places of worship. Multiculturalism is not just about living next to each other. It's about living together. Trust is not built by proximity alone. It is built through repeated everyday contact. We have developed a weak civic identity. As newcomers are encouraged to retain identity but are really asked to adopt a Canadian civic story. Citizenship becomes paperwork and a passport, not belonging, not ownership. Multiculturalism cannot just be a slogan. It has to be a system that actually works. So has multiculturalism failed in Canada? No. but it's under real strain. What is failing is not diversity. What is failing is the promise that diversity alone would solve everything. Canada does not need less multiculturalism. It needs better execution, honest conversations, and policies that match reality. Thank you.